My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil and Plant Science Division and host for today's webinar, Pedon Data Survey Results. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a few business days. All participants join our webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar audio through your device's speakers. There is no telephone dial-in. If you are having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. Be sure to turn up the volume if needed. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down Cisco AnyConnect and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email in Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging in Skype. Taking a look at our webinar room layout, Adobe Connect has content pods that include the feature presentation, chat, and Q&A pods. You can use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod to enter and exit the full screen mode as you choose. We are here to answer your questions. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenter, use the Q&A pod and type in your question. I'll handle technical difficulties the best I can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenter to answer your questions during the verbal Q&A period. So I want to thank Kyle Stevens for being here to present this webinar. And Kyle has recently joined, about a year or a little better, the National Soil Survey Center staff as our National Soil Database Manager. So Kyle, with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce your topic.
Well, thanks, Sean. Well, hello to everybody, and thank you all for taking time out of your day to watch this webinar about our Pedon data and the survey results. Before I dive into the presentation, I just want to provide a little bit more context about my perspective on Pedon data collection and Pedon data entry. So I've been a NRCS soil scientist since 2004, and I have spent the majority of my career working on mostly initial and some update soil survey projects in the Pacific Northwest, really serving at all levels at the MLR Soil Survey Office and in the regional office. So I've been the MLR project leader, and I've been a subset project leader, and I've been a field mapper, and I've also been a soil data quality specialist and served in the role of senior regional soil scientist, and even had a stint as acting regional director. So I've kind of worn numerous hats throughout the region. And I've only recently moved into my current position as the National Database Manager working on the Soil Business System staff. So I mention all that because I just wanted to give you some context about where these questions came from, because the survey questions reflect my understanding of what the field staff has dealt with in collecting pedons and entering pedons in NASIS, and also reflect my personal experiences trying different avenues out. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get into the survey. I'm going to make this. All right, thank you so much. Okay. Jumping into the results. So before I do go right into the data, I just want to give a brief overview of the survey and who took the survey. So this survey, if you're not familiar with it, it was sent out to the Soil and Plant Science Division in December of 2019, and we gave folks about 2 weeks to answer the survey questions. We used a program called Survey 123, the Esri desktop version of that program. There's also a version that works on mobile devices, on phones and tablets. And I want to pause here and just give a big thanks to Alina Stevens in the Region 11 office, who pointed me in the direction of Survey 123 and provided some assistance and guidance in using the application. I also want to say that if anybody needed to create a survey for some reason, this is a very easy to use, intuitive application, and I highly recommend it. We all have access to it. You just need to have your locate your Esri account, which we all have through our government email addresses. The survey consisted of 22 questions about Pedon data collection and Pedon data entry, and it focused mostly on what people are currently doing, although it did touch on some future desires. And then it was sent out to the entire Soil and Plant Science Division staff, as I mentioned, and all state soil scientists. And then we encouraged those folks to share with other state staff and National Cooperative Soil Survey partners who have experience with Pedon data collection and Pedon data entry. The filter we put in place was we asked people to only take the survey if they've collected or entered pedons in the last 5 years. So we didn't want people to answer the questions based on experiences they had many years ago. We wanted to try and stay somewhat relevant to what's currently happening. So participation was extremely high, and we're very happy with the results. We had 194 participants, so thank you all who took the time to take the survey. 157 of them were Soil and Plant Science Division staff. 92 were MLRA Soil Survey Office staff, so not the MLRA Soil Survey Office leaders, but the staff. And then 54 were MLRA Soil Survey Office leaders. And here's the actual breakdown from the survey results. So I just show this to highlight that we hit the target demographic. Obviously, this is who we would want to be taking the survey because these folks, you folks, are the ones collecting the pedons and entering them in the NASIS, and we needed your feedback. Looking at this by GS grade, it aligns with the folks that were the dominant participants of the survey, that 9, 11, 12, 13 level. After reviewing the survey results, I broke it down into 4 categories, and I'm going to go through each category here. The first category is knowledge of pedon data systems. This is questions about how much training you feel you've had, your knowledge of the technical guides you should be using, and so forth. The second section is what are you doing now to collect data in the field. The third section is how do you enter that data into the NASIS database. And the fourth section is a wish list for future technology that the National Soil Survey Center staff could use as we pursue other applications in the future. So what I'm going to do is go through just about all the questions here and then show you the results. Most of these results will be presented as a graph, although some are in spreadsheet form. All of these graphs come directly out of Survey 1 through 3. The application creates the graphs for you, so I just grab screen captures. You'll see the question up here at the top and italics. I tried to underline some of the key points of the question in case I'm moving a little faster and you don't have time to read the entire question. So the first question was about knowledge and training, and then obviously it says the question was, did you receive adequate training from USDA NRCS employee to collect pedon descriptions in the field? And thankfully, the answer was strongly agree. So as you can see, the blue line there at the bottom and the yellow line show us that people felt like they received adequate training, and I was very pleased to see those results. I would have been disappointed to see the strongly disagree and disagree be much higher. So people do feel like they are receiving training. The next question was about training on entering the pedons in the NASIS. So did you feel like you received adequate training on entering the pedons into the NASIS database? And this one, there was a little bit of a change in the results. As you can see, the majority of people, thankfully, still say strongly agree or disagree, but the strongly agrees dropped off a little bit. The neutrals increased, and the disagrees increased a little bit. So while not a huge change, there still was a drop-off, and people do feel that they could use some additional training on how to enter the pedons into NASIS. And so I think both of these questions just serve as a reminder to the regional offices and the MLRA Soil Survey Office leaders that when you have new employees coming on board, it is important to include both field pedon data collection training and a training on how to enter that data into the NASIS database. And we just don't want to forget about that aspect of training. Next question was about using instructions and guidance. And so we asked, do you use the instructions and guidance in Chapter 23 Pedon Data Entry Guide of the NASIS training materials when entering pedons into the NASIS database? If you're not familiar with the NASIS training materials, that is a web page of 26 chapters, I believe, it might be 27, that cover sections of the NASIS database and how to use certain sections of the database. And Chapter 23 deals with how to enter pedons and actually pedons and sites into the database. Unfortunately, the answer here was the majority of people said no. So that is a clear indication that we need to increase the usage of this guide when people are entering pedons into the database. It's a rather lengthy guide. It addresses every table and column in the pedon and site portions of the NASIS database, and it identifies the columns that need to be populated, that you're required to populate, and it identifies those that are typically populated, and it provides guidance for those columns as well. There's a lot of information in there. Is it perfect? Well, no, probably not. No guide that is 120 pages long or however long it is going to be perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And as you use it, please mark it up and provide us feedback so we can improve the guide over time. And as the data model changes, meaning we modify tables and columns in the NASIS database, we typically add, we don't typically remove, but as we add more things, we'll update the guide in the future. But it is what everybody should be using to ensure that we all meet the same standard. So on to the next question about coordinate systems. And this is coming from my personal experience because I know there's confusion about what the standard coordinate system is that's used by the NRCS when entering coordinates for a pedon. So, you know, is this UTM, NAD 27, NAD 83, so forth. Those were the types of answers we gave people to choose from. And the actual answer is WGS 84. So that is the standard coordinate system that everybody should be using when they're entering their XY coordinates for a site/pedon into the NASIS database. That's WGS 84 and decimal degrees. The other coordinate pairs that enter the database, UTMs and degrees, minutes, seconds, are secondary methods for recording the location of the site/pedon, and you can enter them, but they are not the official ones. This is the one that we want to see entered into the database using WGS 84. Thankfully, 74% of you that took the survey answered this question correctly. Unfortunately, 26% did not answer it correctly. So we do have 3/4 of our staff that knew the answer. Unfortunately, 1/4 was not familiar with WGS 84 being the standard system. So a little bit of a training need here. Hopefully, this message is resonating with people as we move forward. Eventually, I would honestly just like to see UTMs and degrees, minutes, seconds either be frozen or removed from our database, and we just use decimal degrees to simplify the way we collect our coordinate pairs. This is what you use when you go into Google Maps, and if you were to enter a pair of coordinates, it would be decimal degrees and WGS 84 because it's a world geographic coordinate system. All right, so summary of the knowledge section. Just that one notice that the National Soil Survey Center should probably remind the regions and MLR Soil Survey Office leaders that staff need to be trained in how to collect pedon descriptions and how to enter that data into the NASIS database, and that everybody should be using the Chapter 23 of the NASIS training materials when they're entering their pedons and sites. And then we also need to communicate clearly that the standard coordinate system for point data is WGS 84 decimal degrees, and the National Soil Survey Center should consider providing training on coordinate systems and how GPS units actually collect X and Y data. I don't think this is one of our strengths at the National Soil Survey Center. It's a complicated subject. I don't think a lot of us get formal training, or maybe that we didn't used to get formal training on how GPS units work and how coordinate systems work. I know I didn't have that experience. Maybe some of the younger folks that are coming on board are getting different training in college before they come on board, but I think this is an area that we could improve. All right, moving into the next section, which is probably a little bit more interesting, and that is looking at the current data collection methods. So the first question we asked in this section was, what kind of GPS-enabled devices are you using to collect coordinates out in the field? And here's the results presented in spreadsheet format. And as you can see, 134, 70% of people are using a simple GPS-only device such as a Garmin Oregon or Garmin 76. And I think part of that is because they are simple, and also we've equipped everybody with those over the years. I know that there was a major buy several years ago for the Garmin Oregons. Some people are using tablets GPS PDAs such as Trimble Junos, a few people using smartphones, and then some people do use Toughbooks, laptops, and there's some other devices as well. But the majority of folks are using the Garmin 76s or Garmin Organs. Next question, have you ever used the import GPS site data function of NASIS to upload coordinates that were collected with a GPS-enabled device? If you're not familiar with this, this is a tool that allows you to import the coordinates in WGS84 decimal degrees into NASIS via a GPX file. That's a file that you can easily create from your Garmin 76 or Garmin Organ. You can actually create it from shapefiles as well, and then import in the NASIS as a starting point before you begin populating sites and pedons. It removes the problem of errors that occur when you manually enter the data, manually enter the coordinates. Those are long numbers, and it's easy to type in the wrong number, so it's nice to import the data. So here's the answer. We do have the majority of people saying no, they do not, they've never used it, but they were aware that it existed, so that's good. And then we had quite a few people, about 50, that weren't even aware this was an option. And then I was happy to see at least 45, 50 people said that they have tried it or have at least used it once in the past. If you're interested in this, it is covered in an appendix in Chapter 23, and it explains step-by-step how to use this tool. So it's something you could take a look at. In the future, and new versions of NASIS, and which is something that we are working on at the National Soil Survey Center, someday we'll have a new application for NASIS. We'll hopefully improve our ability to import data into the NASIS database. But for now, this is our option and will be for the foreseeable future. And it works. It's not too complicated to use. Next question. Have you ever used Pedon PC while working in the field? And well over half of people, well, about half of people said, yes, they've tried it. Half have not ever used it. So about a 50-50 split here on have you ever used Pedon PC while working in the field. And if you're not familiar with Pedon PC, it is a Microsoft Access database that is used to collect pedons, and then those pedons can then be imported into the NASIS database. It was designed years ago when we had an older version of NASIS that was a little bit more clunky, and folks didn't care for entering data directly into that NASIS application. And so a Microsoft Access database version of the portion of the NASIS database was created to enter pedons. There's a lot of other capabilities included with it over time beyond just entering the data, but it was built kind of as a workaround to get past some of the problems people had entering the data directly into NASIS. Maybe now we're a little bit past some of those issues and people are more comfortable entering the data directly into the NASIS database than they used to be in the past. So Pedon PC is still available. You can download it and use it and go ahead and collect pedons in the field and enter and then upload them into NASIS. Some people prefer to actually enter the pedons directly into the Pedon PC program back in their office. They just like it better, and then they upload it into NASIS after they're done. Next question was about ArcPad, and we asked, have you ever used ArcPad while working in the field? This is a program that I used quite a bit several years ago when I was working in the field. It's actually probably going to go away here soon. I don't believe it's supported any longer. I don't think any new versions are coming out, but it is still around at the moment. And about 60-some people, 67 said, yeah, they've used it, but the majority have not ever used ArcPad. Along those lines, asking about Survey 123 or Collector, which are kind of like new ArcPad. I mean, Survey 123 is definitely different, but Collector might be a little similar to ArcPad. These are probably the programs, the Esri applications that are on the horizon that'll be implemented in the foreseeable future if you're interested in field data collection tools. And only a few people have been using them. So we only had 17 people that said yes, 175 said no. We think there's some room for growth with these tools, particularly Survey 123, pointing to work that Alina Stevens has done in Indianapolis. She's developed a Pedon data entry application with Survey 123, and she's also part of a new mobile data collection team that Nathan Perry up in Wasilla, Alaska is heading up. There's, I think, about 10 people on that team, and they're going to look at what is being used across the country right now and then evaluate potential candidates for support by the National Soil Survey Center for future growth in mobile data collection. And Survey 123 is probably going to be one of the top candidates because it's designed for that, and Collector might be something that's included as well. All right, on to one of the more interesting questions, I think, and that is, how do you typically record a full pedon description while working outdoors in the field? And this is really getting at, do you use paper or do you use a device to collect that full pedon description? And the answer, looking at it in spreadsheet form, is beyond is paper. 164 people, or 86.3%, just record on a piece of paper. Other folks use a variety of methods. We do have 17 people that said they do use Pedon PC to directly enter the information to a computer while in the field. And then we had a few people that use Pedon PC to capture some slight information, but then fill the rest of it out on a piece of paper. But really, the majority of you, just about everybody, is using paper out in the field. And looking at this graphically, it's the same question. I just thought it really drove home the point. That purple bar is obviously the response saying I use a piece of paper. So summary of our current data collection methods. Simple Garmin GPS units are the main tool used to collect coordinates. From my personal experience, I imagine this is related to ease of use. They're not complicated, they're reliable. Plus, we've delivered those to all the offices, or just about all the offices. 88% of people collect Pedon descriptions on a piece of paper, so it's by far the preferred method out there among the field staff. While over half of our field staff have tried Pedon PC, only 11% use the application, and only 9% are currently using it to record pedons. And I believe a lot of this use might be concentrated down to Region 9, although I imagine it's used in some other regions as well. Very few people have experience with Survey 123, and I think there's room for growth and experimentation with this application. Okay, on to current data entry. This is a little bit of a shorter section. First question is, how do you enter Pedon data into the NASIS database? And again, looking at this in spreadsheet format, highlighting the top two answers, it is manually type the information into NASIS, or they manually type the information into Pedon PC and then upload the data into NASIS. Surprisingly, this somehow conflicted with the previous question about Pedon PC, where 17 people said they used Pedon PC in the field and then uploaded the data to NASIS, where this one's indicating that only 11 people did that. So there's some, maybe the question was worded in a confusing way. But anyway, the majority of people are collecting the data on a piece of paper, sitting down, and manually entering the data into the database. And this is looking at that same question in a graphical way, just to drive home the point. So this question asks, if you manually type your Pedon information in NASIS, do you use NASIS forms? And the majority of you said no. Many of you may not even be familiar with NASIS forms. NASIS forms is a section of the NASIS desktop client, what you all think of as, most of us think of as NASIS, and it allows you to create a custom data entry form. It was, I think, the idea for it was formulated many years ago when there was a thought that we would use NASIS in the field, disconnect it from the network, and it would mimic Pedon PC, and people could create forms to collect Pedon descriptions. So that's part of the reason we created this NASIS forms. It hasn't really been stood up or used very much. Most people are comfortable just entering the data directly into the tables, which often I refer to as the grids. So you're just opening the grids, entering the data directly in there. Once you get comfortable with it, it's not too bad to do that. But maybe there's some room for growth with forms, I'm not sure. So summary of the current data entry before we get to the last section. When I aggregated all those results in that spreadsheet I showed you several slides ago, 94.1% of people are manually entering the pedons. Some people put them directly into NASIS. Some people use secondary programs such as Pedon PC or the Excel spreadsheets, and that can be uploaded into the database. Really less than 6% of people capturing pedons in the field and then auto-uploading the data into NASIS. So it's just really not a viable solution at the moment. I think there's room for growth in auto-uploading of Pedon data in the NASIS, but I don't think any of our current tools and systems are what we really want to support moving forward. Now, for the Pedon PC users, I'm not suggesting we get rid of Pedon PC. I just don't know if that's where we want to keep putting our support in the future. And NASIS forms currently aren't being utilized. I mean, I think it's pretty clear people can easily enter the pedons into the database. Again, putting on my hat in my previous positions where I did a lot of pedon data entry, even as a sole data quality specialist, I did that. It's just not that hard to enter pedons into the NASIS client these days once you're comfortable with entering into the tables. Could it be improved? Probably. I don't see why not, but I don't think it's that difficult. All right, moving into the future. This question asked everybody to evaluate what they think about using paper in the field versus a device. So do you think it's better to use the devices instead of pencil and paper to collect pedon descriptions in the field? So if you said yes, you're pro devices. If you said no, you're pro paper. And the answers, unsurprisingly, based on the previous questions, were no. So the majority of people said no, they don't think it's better to use a device. They prefer paper. But what is interesting here is roughly about this many people are saying, yeah, they do think it's better to use a device. But if you look at those previous questions and about what is being used in the field, whether it's paper or device, there's probably only about 20 or so people out there, or maybe 20 or so less, that are using devices to collect the pedon descriptions and upload them to NASIS. So I think that shows room for growth here, but there's a desire to use devices. It's just that there's limitations in the current solutions that we have and that we need to come up with better systems in the future. So after I asked that question, I then said, go ahead and you can put in text entries for your main reasons for preferring the paper or preferring the device. So if you preferred paper, what were your reasons? And I have 2 slides to go over that because I think they're interesting reasons, and I think there's a lot of value in these responses as the National Soil Survey Center staff evaluates where we put our resources to support mobile data collection. So first, answer is, and I should say before I go through all these, I wasn't able to quantitatively evaluate them all, but generally the more often I saw a response or a similar response, I weighted a little higher and I put it higher up in the list. So one of the top ones was that paper ensures quality control occurs when the data is manually entered in the NASIS database. So there's a secondary quality control process occurs when you sit down in front of your computer and enter the data into the database that you don't get when you collect it in the field and upload it. Simple and easier to use came up a lot. A lot of people said it was faster than a device after accounting for time spent managing hardware and software. So while devices could show time savings, there's a lot of overhead in managing complicated devices and complicated software. This is a very common response. 232 is too complicated for a device. This is a good answer, and one that most of you probably have experienced if you've worked with a device. You want to jump around on your 232 while you're describing a pedon. So you have 10 horizons. That would be a lot. But let's say you had 10 horizons. You're down at the 8th horizon, and you're recording information about redoxomorphic features, and somehow it triggers your memory that you need to go up and look at that 3rd horizon and change what you put in that one there. So that is very common. We've all done that when we're recording our 232s. We want to move all over the form. This is one that I had never considered. You can add any notes you want and put them anywhere, including sketches, and that's a really good point. There's no issues when muddy or dirty, although that issue sort of comes up for preferring device too. You don't have to worry about the hard-to-see screens, although I think that's an issue that's probably not as bad as it used to be. That was probably a bigger problem when these devices first started to be sent out to the field offices. I know that seeing the screens in the field was a big deal, but we all have smartphones these days. I'm sure you've used it your smartphone or your tablet outside in the sun, and you can see it fairly well these days. So there's certainly, the companies are much better at producing technology that can be seen out in the sun. You don't have to worry about batteries, and that's a big deal if you work in very remote areas. So if you're, let's say, an Alaska crew and you're out on a 10-day field hitch, you can't have your batteries go out. You know, you're spending $100,000 to go out and do mapping for 10 days on helicopter hitches. You have to have reliable data collection methods. And the same is true even down here in the lower 48. If you're working in wilderness areas and you're hiking, maybe you have a multi-day hitch, or you just had a long day of driving and hiking, and boy, you just don't want your batteries to fail on you. Paper creates a physical permanent record. It doesn't break down or lose data in the field, although you could argue that you can definitely break or lose paper. It's very lightweight. It's the only reliable option for working in remote conditions, which ties into the battery issue I was talking about. And it shows the entire 232 at one time, which is can be challenging with some of the devices, particularly smartphones. And there's no constant learning curve. And last, I just want to say that many people said they had tried devices and then went back to paper. So this isn't the responses from a group of people that just out of hand decided they never wanted to try a device. So they had given them a fair shake. Okay, now on to the folks that prefer the device, and let's look at the reasons for preferring a device, because there's definitely good reasons here. It saves time, which is a great point. So if you have the system up and running, you're able to record your Pedon description in the field and then auto-upload it. You don't have to do that data entry again. It standardizes data, which is really important, actually. So we're all using the same choice list. You don't have the problem with a transcription error. You don't have to worry about handwriting. And I'm sure we've all dealt with an old Pedon description in our office where you couldn't understand the handwriting. Sadly, and honestly, I have to say I've read some of my own Pedon descriptions where I couldn't understand some of the handwriting. So that's a very good point. The data is produced immediately and is readily available, and that's really nice. You know, when I worked with ArcPad, we weren't taking full Pedon descriptions, but we were taking site notes, quick observations out in the field, and we would generate shape files or feature classes and download those to the computer, let's say on a Friday afternoon, and Monday you would come in and you'd have that data in ArcMap and available to assist you with compilation in the field, in the office. Paper can be destroyed or lost, although you could definitely argue that devices could be destroyed or lost. Can still record data in the rain. You can definitely do that with paper as well. So those were the main reasons. Because not as many people preferred devices, there wasn't as many reasons to go over here. All right, on to the next question. Which of the following problems, if any, have you encountered when using computers, GPS, PDA, GPS, smartphones, or tablets to collect pedons while working in the field? So this is kind of getting at the same issues that people just listed for the why they preferred paper. It was a little bit of a poor design flaw in the way I put the questions together, so it's a little bit redundant. But in this case, I provided about, I think 15 or 20 answers of common issues people may encounter. And here I was able to quantitatively evaluate the results and then show the ones that were most dominant. So this is a quantitative display, although I don't give the numbers. But this is the top issues people listed. Screen hard to see, so that's still something that had bothered a lot of people and was on people's mind. But again, I don't think that's as big of a deal as it used to be. Couldn't see entire Pedon description on a small screen. So that was obviously a very big problem. Screen's too small, same thing. Full Pedon description is too complicated. Battery life of device was too short. Starting and logging into device took too long. Slow response time of device. And I think that was the extent of it. So then I asked if you could remove all these limitations that we just went over that you identified in previous questions, and the NRCS could develop a new smartphone or tablet application to collect the full Pedon description, do you think you would begin using that or not, was the question. And 42% of people said they would begin using the device. So that was good, but I thought that number would have been quite a bit higher. So we're saying we got rid of all the limitations that were identified. Why not begin using the device? And still, 34% of people just said, I would just continue using paper. So basically, there's a strong contingent of folks out there that are saying, I don't really care what you send to my office. I'm going to record my pedon on a piece of paper and enter it into the database manually. And that's good to know that that is, a big part of our culture out there, and that's what people want to do, because we don't want to waste time or resources if people aren't going to use the applications we develop. And 13% said they would test the device. So there's still some interest in the device, so we're not going to disregard that. But we do recognize that it will never be universal, that everybody will accept whatever application is developed and begin using it right away. And 5% of folks still want to use Pedon PC, and so we don't want to forget about our Pedon PC users. There's a strong contingent of people that have Pedon PC built into their business operations, and we need to respect that and continue to support that as best we can. And then we do have a very small contingent using Survey 123, and they like their program. Then we asked, would you like the National Soil Survey Center to pursue the development of a smartphone or tablet application that could collect full pedon descriptions in the field? And despite the answers on the previous question, by far people said yes. So even if you might be one of those people that just is going to use paper no matter what, you still, some of you still said, but you should go ahead and develop something. So you recognize that it's something that we should continue to pursue. So that's good to know that there is support for that development, that we're not completely wasting our time. And then last, I'm just kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit, but I think there's some interesting ideas. And this was the dream big question. So if you took the survey, you'll remember this was at the end. You could write whatever you wanted about what you thought the ideal system would be, what new functionality you would like to see implemented. You can talk about devices and applications and implementation of existing software or development of new software and applications. I mean, it was completely open-ended because we wanted to get the ideas from the field staff. And if you use Survey 123 ever, you do get word clouds back in the results. So I'm just showing this to you as a way, as an example of what Survey 123 can do. I actually didn't find that too helpful for this response, but I think in certain types of situations, certain questions, this might be a good way to see what the top choices might be. So I just wanted to display what the results look like. But what I did was I read them all, and I thank you all for taking the time to respond. And of the 190 so participants, 94 participants, I think I got 120, 130 responses to this question, so maybe even more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was quite a few, and they were great comments. And so here's some of the top ones. Voice recognition was requested again and again, and people talked about how great it would be if they could just speak the pedon description to the device, so they don't have to write anything down. I think envisioning a computer, a tablet, a smartphone, some device, heck, a watch, I don't know. They have something there, and they could just say A horizon 0 to 10 centimeters, and B T horizon 10 to 20 centimeters, silty, loam, so forth. So it's something to consider as those technologies improve over time. Scanning paper and auto-uploading. This came up a lot. So not necessarily a mobile application, but people are saying, hey, why can't I just scan in my 232 and auto-upload it? And I like the idea, and so you'll see later on in some of the responses somebody suggested a signature recognition software application that can recognize custom handwriting. So it's an interesting idea. Tablets were the top option for hardware, and but the software should work on the phone too, so that came up quite a bit. People said they need dedicated field devices, meaning you don't take your main computers out to the field. I think that is still occurring in some parts of the country where they have tablets or laptops that they're taking out to the field. I don't think that's common, but I think it's a problem where it occurs. This came up quite a bit, scanning devices, particularly for soil color, but maybe for other relevant information that could be auto-uploaded into the database. And whether that's for pedon descriptions or maybe getting at the, the VNIR technology. I think they've called something different now. But there's the efforts to start scanning and collecting data. And it's an interesting advancement in our technology, and I think we'll see more of that over time. And I like the idea of having a device read the color chip, and then we won't have to argue about a 3.2 versus 3.3 in the field any longer either. Data must be directly uploaded into NASIS. Ideally, it could happen wirelessly, so we need the QC to occur during upload too. We want the choice list to be easy to customize. So if you've worked with Pedon PC, I believe that's something that you have to deal with, or may have to deal with, which is some of the choice lists that are included in that application. They all come out of NASIS. They're really long. For example, the area table is all areas, all types of areas in the United States, and you don't need all the areas in the location you're working in. If you're in Arizona, you don't need the Oregon areas or the Maine areas, so you have to limit those choice lists. Otherwise, you get really lengthy choice lists that are a burden to wade through. Any forms that the application has should be very easy to customize. This is a good one, a single device solution. So we don't want to lose sight of that. We want something that can do GPS data recording, have a camera, and upload directly into NASIS from the device. So we want to not have a lot of intermediary tasks that you have to go through to get the data into the device and into NASIS. We don't want the camera to be separate. We don't want the GPS to be separate, and so forth. Device must be lightweight and durable, and it must start up fast and not lose a signal or require constant login. So we just don't want the overhead of starting and stopping the device all the time and having it break down on us, because otherwise we won't use it. Must be large enough to see the screen and the entire Pedon description, and we don't want the additional otter boxes and add-ons for ruggedizing. A shapefile should automatically be created at some point from whatever application we develop. This fourth bullet here about PDFs was very interesting, came up several times. People said they want a way to just quickly see what they're entering in to the application, and presumably they're thinking a PDF document or some other way to visualize the Pedon description so they could do a little QC on it. Automate it back up to the cloud so data isn't lost. So if you do have cell phone coverage, the data could be automatically backed up, and that way if your device does break down for some reason, you don't lose the data, assuming you have cell phone coverage. Some parts of the country, we have to remind everybody, don't have cell phone coverage, especially if you're working in wilderness areas in the west or remote areas up in Alaska. Dynamic user cell size adjustment. Allow users to create diagrams so they can make sketches. See yourself on a soil map or other digital base layers like you could with ArcPad. Stylus must always be an option because screens can get dirty. You should be able to record photos and then upload them into NASIS, something we've talked about for many years. Some people said upgrade Pedon PC, but I didn't receive a lot of specifics on that, so we would need more information on what those upgrades need to be. Build a Survey 123 form and use it on iPads or other tablets. Create an app that works on multiple platforms. Create cloud storage system, allows non-NRCS users to upload Pedons, which will allow students to enter the Pedons. That could be helpful. Digital transect forms, auto-generate sample labels from Pedon description. I like that idea. It can take some time to produce those sample labels. Use a signature recognition software so handwritten forms can be recognized. Create a process for entering legacy Pedons and converting the PLSS data into points. I mean, that's kind of a different thing than a new application, but that would be really nice to have that. It should work outside the CCE environment. We need to create a digital front and back end form that completely mimics the 232. The method must be efficient and not distract from field work. Photos should be associated with the GPS point. The third to last bullet here is an interesting idea. Need to be able to say same as to copy last Pedon or Pedon Horizon and start editing existing data. And then auto soil coloring again, I think I just was redundant with that one there. And writing on a screen just like you do on paper. So there was actually a lot more suggestions. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to list all those. So quick summary of the future, and then we'll move on to questions. This will be pretty much my last slide here. Paper will likely be the main method of data collection for the foreseeable future, just like entering the data manually into the database is going to be the main method for the foreseeable future. It's just simple. It doesn't break. The 232 is too complicated for devices, and it allows for QC of the data. Staff do support and the National Soil Survey Center continue to develop a new mobile data collection system, and that's why we formed the mobile data collection team. It's a sub-team of the database team. They're just getting up and running, but we are going to try and put some resources behind continuing to develop mobile data collection systems. But we won't have 100% usage rate anytime soon. We don't expect that. Clearly, people prefer paper, at least a strong contingent do. Some people said that new systems should include voice recognition and scanning of handwritten notes. It should be lightweight, single solution, rugged, durable, have long battery life, and easy to customize. And it must have some sort of QC system which allows viewing of Pedon descriptions in a Word or PDF. So I just kind of picked a few of the options out of those previous lists. So with that, I am done with the presentation, and I would be happy to take questions. And Sean, I don't know how, oh, there it is. Okay, I'm going to come out of full presentation mode. So thank you for your time, and yeah, please ask questions.
All right, thanks, Kyle. So I'll just encourage people to put your question into the Q&A, and we'll go through those. So there's quite a few in the Q&A pod, Kyle, so I'll just go through these and we'll tackle them. So Steve asks, or says that WGS 84 geographic is a little more specific response. UTM coordinates can be specified using either datum, WGS 84 or NAD 83. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, that's a great point. And the problem is that the way our database model was set up, it causes an immense amount of confusion. So prior to the introduction of WGS 84 decimal degrees as the standard latitude and longitude for a site, we had two ways to enter a coordinate pair. So you could enter UTMs and you could enter degrees, minutes, seconds. And that still exists in the site table today. So you can put two coordinate pairs in there, but there's one datum field. And I have personally encountered numerous instances where the UTMs and the degrees, minutes, seconds are using different datums, even though there's one datum populated and it applies to both of them. And people don't even understand that that single datum field applies to both of them. So it's all set up in a very, frankly, confusing method, and it means the data that is entered is somewhat suspect. The addition of the WGS 84 as standard lat long back in about 2011, I want to say. I think it was instituted when NASIS 6 came out. Might be a little bit after NASIS 6. Anyway, it cleaned up some of that, and it made it clear what the coordinate system should be. So yes, Steve's absolutely right, but we just want to get away from all that. People can collect data in whatever coordinate pairs they want, using whatever datums they want. But when it goes into the database, we really should just be dealing with WGS 84, standard latitude and longitude in decimal degrees.
All right, Wayne comments that maybe Chapter 23 in the NASIS user guide is too cumbersome to use. And would it be better to incorporate into the help text for populating fields? So kind of put it more in context with what's being entered. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great idea. I had never considered that before, and it is a long document to wade through, but I will say that once you use it a couple times, you kind of know what you do and what you should and should not be doing. So sure, it might be a bit of a burden the first time a brand new employee has to sit down with the document, maybe the first 10 times, but eventually they know which way to be pointed and what to do, and they don't need to rely as heavily on having the document available. But putting guidance into the help menu is a good idea. That does require database model changes, though, and that would take funding and time to implement.
Kyle, there is a help text in the database model already. It's just that I can never get anybody to tell me what to put in the help text field.
And is that something that's automatically updated, George, or is that something that only comes out when we release the new database model because it's all stored in the metadata?
It's deployed with a follow-on data model.
Okay. Well, it's good to know that it's an option. It's something I'd never thought of.
It shows up if it's there. It shows up when you do a view information on a column or a table or whatever. There's not much there. And I have tried several times to ask people to help me fill that out. But they all have something else they need to do. Anyway, it's there if we want to use it.
Thanks, George.
Edwin asked, if is the digital data collection still using the pen?
I didn't include any questions about the pen, but there were areas for people to list other methods of data collection, and the pen was not listed at all. So I don't believe anybody is using the pen in the field.
No, they can't use the pen because the company that supports it is out of business. But it did do the handwriting thing, and it could be used for hours out in the field, and it just plugged back into NASIS.
All right, there's a survey office saying, how do we try survey 123? Well, I know you
try. That's a great question. I am not the Survey 123 expert. What I can say is Survey 123, again, is both a desktop application, so you can access it through your browser, and there is a mobile application that could be put onto a smartphone or tablet device. You can create the forms on the desktop application, I believe, then port them over to your handheld device. We all have Esri accounts. You'll need to contact your regional office for support and setting yours up if you don't have it. Once you can log into ArcGIS Online, you can then access Survey 123 and begin to create forms. There's help menus on there. I imagine there's also training on how to use Survey 123. Again, it was very easy to use, though, and very intuitive, so I don't think it would take very much time to learn how to use it. I can't point you in the direction of somebody that's the main point of contact. We don't have that type of support right now at the National Soil Survey Center.
Alina.
Well, I didn't want to point Alina out, George.
But there is a problem with Survey 123 and NASIS. Alina's work that she's doing is great.
Yes, Alina does know what's going on, but I don't know if Alina wanted the entire Soil and Plant Science Division contacting her for support on Survey 123.
The problem is getting it from the Survey 123 database into NASIS. And if somebody wants to create a form in Survey 123, which they certainly can, they're not going to be able to get it into NASIS.
Well, that's a great point, but I just want to say to everybody that's interested in Survey 123, you don't have to collect the full Pedon description either. You may have other information you want to collect that you could build short forms. It could just be, types of plan information that you need to make correlations in your survey. You're interested in geology. You're interested in the geomorphology. I don't know what it is, but I mean, we all collect both full Pedon descriptions and quick observations when you're doing, both, full update projects or initial soil surveys. And so you might be able to make custom forms to create in Survey 123. And what it does is it produces an Excel file. I think there is also an ability to generate a shape file from it as well. I would not disregard Collector. I don't know anything about Collector, but there may be some potential there as well. I encourage people to, if you have time and interest, to explore these tools, because most likely anything we come up with is going to come from the field staff up to the Soil Survey Center and not be top down. So we need people to try different applications out and give us feedback. So it does not have to be a full Pedon description that you are trying to take to collect in the field. You could collect all kinds of information.
So a follow-up question to that Survey 123 is, if somebody's already downloaded it to their phone, is there a form already created for them to download with some common forms?
Well, I know that Alina's forms are available. If you log into Survey 123 on the desktop application through the browser, I guess it's not really a desktop application, you're accessing it through a browser, but it's you'll see all the forms that were made under the NRCS account, the NRCS Esri account. So you'll see my Pedon survey in there, for example. I don't know how to use it beyond that. I only created the survey in Survey 123, so you'd have to explore on your own how to move those the available forms over to your mobile device.
So there's a guess that says, since so many want voice recorder, can we put money into developing this technology?
I don't see why not. It's something that we could discuss. We are going through a modernization effort of our databases and applications right now at the National Soil Survey Center. It's going to be most likely a multi-year effort, and it's something that we will put on the table now that we've received that feedback.
Yes, this is George Teachman again. I just want to put some history in that. We tried way in the past to, when you're down in the hole, to use the small portable tape recorders and read into them. The problem was it's a whole lot noisier down in the hole than you can imagine. The microphone picks up a lot of background. But phones today have a much better, much more selective, and that's something we've always asked for. So why not?
John is asking, is there a plan to eventually incorporate citizen science Pedon data into NASIS from outside the official NCS's partnership? So kind of the idea of crowdsourcing, helping us collect information. You want to speak to that?
Well, I don't know of any plan right now to do that. I don't see why we couldn't explore that if there is that data available, but we don't have that in the plans right now. So just to give you a simple answer, that's not in the works at the moment.
All right, Eve is asking, is the new sub-team going to create some Survey 123 forms so not everyone has to create their own? It would be good if a set of forms would be available for staff to at least start with.
Well, that's a great idea, Eva. Right now, the sub-team hasn't even had their first meeting yet, so I'm not in charge of the sub-team or even on the sub-team. I'll probably sit in on their first meeting, but it's really going to be up to them to drive the agenda. But I think initially they're just going to be evaluating what devices, hardware and software is being used, and then they'll formulate their plan from there. So I'm certainly not going to speak for exactly what they're going to do, but I really like your suggestion, and I would love to see us develop something like that.
So Rob has a question about, or comment on access database stability. Is it more stable? Sounds like people are using it quite regularly.
The access database?
Yes.
I'm not sure I'm clear on what the question is. The access database does have the 2 gigabyte size limit, so that can cause some instability issues if you approach that. I can't imagine that will be a problem with Pedon PC. I doubt people exceed.
What he's talking about, Pedon PC access database.
Yeah, I can't, I'm not the Pedon PC person, so I'm not going to try and answer that question, Rob. It would be better for me to talk to people that know more about Pedon PC before I sit here and try and give you an answer.
Pedon PC instability that Rob is talking about is well known. And when Henry was still here, he found a way around it. You're not going to like it, but you have to have fewer forms open at the time.
Well, it sounds like George had your answer. Thanks, George.
And the Pedon PC is actually using the .mdb format instead of the more current .accdb, and maybe the .accdb would work. So it may work, but Microsoft is going away from that too.
Well, Kyle, looks like we pretty well exhausted the questions that were in the chat. I want to thank you, Kyle, for your time and effort to make this presentation, and thanks to all the participants for joining in. We hope you found this information beneficial. We had well over 170 people join today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a few business days. So feel free to let your colleagues know about this training opportunity, and this concludes our webinar presentation.